In the first century, when the sun set over Jerusalem and the crowds had gone home after Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, there were 12 men left standing. They weren't the most popular or influential people. In fact, if you were an ordinary Jew, you wouldn't have known their names. Let me ask you, do you know who Bartholomew was? Did Jesus have more than 12 disciples? Yes, he did. We see his name in the lists of the 12 and the 72. He is always grouped with Philip, which makes sense, because he probably came from the same region, somewhere in northern Israel, perhaps even from the same family. And there is also a mysterious incident where someone called Bartholomew is linked with Thomas in a passage found only in one ancient manuscript. It reads, "Then Thomas, who was called Didymus, and Nathanael, who was called Bartholomew, went together to the place where Jesus had told them to look, and they saw the linen wrappings lying there." We don't know how he died or where he died or even if he continued to be known as Bartholomew. I mean, we remember Mary and Martha for hosting Jesus and serving him. Maybe he chose him because he wasn't looking for popularity, but for faithfulness. They didn't build great churches or found monasteries or write books that people read. In fact, we don't even know what languages they spoke, only that they spoke many. Tradition says that they carried the message in word and deed to Mesopotamia, India, and Armenia. They walked among people who worshiped gods other than Yahweh. And sometimes the best way to walk with Jesus is without the crowd noticing. They shared the love of a God they didn't fully understand, but whose scars matched their own wounds. Because we're all on a mission, whether we realize it or not. We're all carrying a message. We're all reaching out to people who need hope. We're all trying to live in a way that makes sense of suffering, injustice, and death. And we're all ambassadors of a kingdom that's not of this world. Maybe he chose him because he knew he would walk by faith, not by fame. But we're traveling through life, and we're meeting people along the way who need to know that they're loved. And sometimes we can show them that love better by not making a big deal out of our faith. Sometimes the best thing we can do is walk quietly, humbly, and faithfully, knowing that our steps are being watched. Tradition says that he performed a miracle in front of the king, turning water into wine. So what will you do with the message you've been given? Will you shout it from rooftops? Will you whisper it to your neighbor? And the longer we're silent, the louder our testimony becomes. Will you live it out in your actions? Will you write about it? Or will you simply hold on to it? And from there, the relics were transferred to a church in Rome. Well, if he was, we don't know about it because history has forgotten him. Remember, in the end, we will not be remembered for our reputation. We will be remembered for our relationship with Jesus. So let's live quiet and courageous lives, walking with him every step of the way. In fact, even the church hasn't remembered him as clearly as she has remembered the other disciples. She knows that he walked with Jesus, but she doesn't know much more than that. But centuries later, during the reign of King Chosroes I of Persia, some of his followers stole the remains and brought them back to Armenia, where they built a monastery around his tomb. The monastery is still there, along with others in India and Ethiopia, each believing they have the relics of the saint. And the king liked this magic trick, but he wanted to see more. So the next day, Bartholomew healed a blind man, and the king wanted to see another miracle. So Bartholomew raised a dead boy from the grave. This impressed the king, but instead of believing in the God of Abraham, he asked Bartholomew to teach him how to perform these miracles. And when Bartholomew refused, the king killed him. This was somewhere around 73 AD. When we follow Jesus, we can expect persecution, hunger, thirst, fatigue, and loneliness, like when Paul traveled to Europe, preaching the gospel on roads for years without an audience. Or like when Peter traveled to Babylon to preach and was crucified upside down because he didn't want to die in the same way as Jesus. We could say that Peter wanted to die a martyr's death, but Paul and Bartholomew did not. We remember Zacchaeus for climbing a tree to see Jesus. We even remember people who denied Jesus for their role in his crucifixion. But very few have heard of Bartholomew. So we come to the conclusion that his greatest contribution to the church was to walk with Jesus. Then the two disciples who were coming ran to see for themselves. So they both saw and believed. Now, this story doesn't appear in any other manuscripts, but if it is authentic, it shows us something interesting, that at least in the early church, the names Nathanael and Bartholomew were used interchangeably. Some scholars think he may have been Nathanael, but that's just a theory. History remembers little of his journey, although tradition credits him with bringing the gospel to India and translating the Bible into different languages. In reality, though, we don't know anything about his life after the Gospels were written. So we can only speculate based on stories passed down through oral tradition, writings from early church historians, and accounts from places where people still claim he preached. You see, when it comes to this disciple, everything we know fits into a small paragraph in the Bible. There is even a list of 72. And yet we don't know much about them because most of what we know about Jesus comes through the eyes of the 12. So today, let's go beyond Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because in those Gospels, Bartholomew only gets a quick mention. So the question is, who was he? But they would change the world. They were Jesus' disciples. Today, we will walk with one of these men, a man who walked with Jesus, but about whom almost nothing is recorded. We have found him, the one Moses in the law and the prophets wrote about, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. But Nathanael replies, Nazareth, isn't that a town of no account? Philip says, come and see. So the two of them go to find Jesus, who says to Nathanael, before Philip found you, I saw you under the fig tree. Nathanael said to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. And Jesus replied, do you believe only because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than that. Then Jesus told him, very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So some think that Nathanael's doubt and then confession of faith was so powerful that Jesus predicted something special for him and opened heaven. Well, we know that he was a disciple. We meet him for the first time in John chapter 1, where Philip meets Nathanael and tells him, and when we read about the 12 disciples, we see that there was a Bartholomew listed among them, the brother of James. But once we leave the pages of the New Testament, we hear nothing more about him. There's a lot of theories about where he went, like Armenia, Mesopotamia, but we simply don't know. Now you might think that walking with Jesus would result in a prominent place in church history. Why did Jesus choose him? It wasn't until years later that the church declared them saints. It wasn't until centuries later that anyone built a statue in their honor. Sometime during their travels, Bartholomew met King Amazius, who ruled over Armenia from 287 to 262 BC. According to legend, his body was thrown into a river, but a star appeared and guided a bishop named Elios to his tomb. So was Bartholomew a great preacher? Was he a miracle worker? Was he famous in his day? Bartholomew is a reminder for us that sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest. Sometimes the person with the least renown accomplishes the most. This brings us to our final point. Why does his story matter to us? Yes, we may not all be traveling the world. I don't know where you are in your journey with Jesus, but I do know that the crowds have gone home, and now it's just you and him. Let us take a moment of silence to think about our response to Jesus' call to follow him. When we're silent, we're testifying. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it with your friends.